What's up?
I can't believe that's a thing on YouTube. But anyways, lately I've been finding myself shooting with windows in the background. This is on a very special lens, the rehoused 35mm movie cam from Arri. Very nice look. We have a grade on the timeline. We have an image that is a little bright back here. So I'm going to bring down the exposure to where she's looking good while keeping in mind this should be looking like real life and not too crazy. So we have to be subtle. So I think she's good right here.
Feeling like I should, I'm all good, I'm all good.
After this, we want to tackle our highlights, and I'll go through a couple different ways in Resolve that you can do this. Keep in mind, this happens before your Rec 709 or your grade.
Feeling like I should, I'm all good.
We'll start with the highlight wheel. So I'm going to bring that down to 90. What we're going to do now is adjust where it's pulling. If we drag this up, if you look at the scopes, it's only affecting the very top. So here, there's no change to the image. And we're going to bring this down till we get some of that detail back in. And you can see there's a point where it kind of just flattens out the detail that's out there. And if you just get this in the right spot, maybe to somewhere around here, that's looking pretty good. This is what we had before, and this is what we have now.
Feeling like I should.
Okay, we'll try one more. We'll stay on the same frame, but we'll just do this in the curves. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab not the top part of the curve, but right below it and just pull down. And I'm looking at the scopes right now. I'm just going to pull it down until we get back kind of around that 90. So our background is looking good. She is too dark. So I'm going to click her and we can see that's where she is on this curve. And then I'm going to grab this, bring up her exposure a little bit, and then I'm going to bring down the shadows a little bit. And we can just see what happens here to just make it pop a little bit more. We've tamed the highlights out the window, just all within the curve. We will do one more. I added a new version so we can go back to this, where we, instead of grabbing below the top of the curve, we will actually grab the top of the curve. So I'm gonna bring this down. I'm bringing it down for the background. So this is where I want the background to be. I will click her, bring her up, bring the shadows down a little bit. Finesse this, so that's looking better. Maybe pull that down a little. So slightly different approach, and before we had this, so now we have this, and we can compare that to our first version where the highlights are in a similar spot, but she is popping a little more here, likely because we brought this up here. And we can move into this one and just bring the highlights down to match where the other version is. And we have two images that are only adjusted in the curve below the grade that have two completely different looks, but we have saved the highlights and managed them a little bit more.
I'm all good.
In the primary wheels, we can adjust the highlight and bring that up and down. And if you change it on here, it also is the same in the log wheels. So for highlights, same in primaries and logs. So we can just bring down our highlights like this. And this to me kind of makes like an HDR-ish looking image. So we could see the difference between bringing down the highlights here and doing the work we did in the HDR wheels, where this image looks a little more natural. It's kind of like popping more like an HDR look when we do the highlights here, whereas she looks much better with the HDR wheels.
Feeling like I should, I'm all good.
Another one that people might get mad at me for is just using lift, gamma, and gain. So I'm going to bring down our gain, get the highlights around 90, bring up our gamma, and we can see that this is really flattening things out. Bring down the shadows a little bit. While this brings down our highlights, we have kind of a weirdish looking image here for this scene compared to the others, but I still think that you could do this in certain scenarios. We could see bringing down the offset, which is kind of like the global wheel in HDR, and we'll bring down the highlights, then we'll bring back up the offset so we can see what that did. And let's look at another clip. This is also a really special lens that I'm not going to mention what it is, but if you can guess, I will have a lot of respect for you. Okay, so this is an example where the background is pretty blurred, so it's not like we really need to see detail back there, which can happen anytime you're shooting with windows in the background where you're at like a 50 or 60 or longer where there's sky and it's just white or solid and it doesn't quite matter to see the detail. I like her exposure here, but I might say this just looks a little too bright. So I'm going to bring down the highlight and I'm just looking at the scopes, and I feel like somewhere around there is good, and we can see what happens there. It kind of looks like a little more like film to me, but I think we went too far, so I'm just going to bring it up a little and maybe there. So to be able to adjust just the highlights in the HDR wheels and tune the range that they are grabbing is very nice, and this looks natural to me, and this is the difference. By eye, this looks like kind of clipped. We can bring it down and kind of even things out here, where we're keeping her looking the same. Similar scenario here. We don't really need to see what's out here, but this is kind of bright. We'll go back into the highlight, bring it down. And even that right there is kind of okay with me, but I might just bring this up a little so it's more so just grabbing the highlights. And we can see that we're taming that window, but we still aren't really getting the detail back totally. So when I bring down our zone graph so that we can get that detail back, but this is all looking weird, I'm then gonna go back and raise the highlights and go back and forth between the zones and the wheels to finesse this to the point where we can see the detail that's back here, where here we could not, and she still looks normal. We didn't push it too far where it's starting to affect her, but we can see it affects her shirt, her arm here, but it still kind of looks normal out the window. You bounce back and forth between the two and you can get that detail back and not have your image look too weird. Her face is still looking weird. Keep bringing it up. Go here, make a move here. That's pretty nice. Still bright outside, still looks normal on her, and we have an image that I could be okay with. I have found that this is super useful for a lot of footage that I am processing through Resolve with Windows in the background, and that'll do it for today. Peace.
Feeling like I should, I'm all good.